Breaking news just moments ago, a fresh look at the U.S. economy. Long-awaited data on the labor market showing that the unemployment rate rose to a 4-year high last month.
That number didn't rise out of nowhere. It rose after the U.S. quietly slammed the brakes on one thing the labor market runs on: people. When fewer workers enter the system, the economy doesn't protect jobs. It freezes, and frozen systems don't hire, they reject.
Labor Day is for the people who do the honest, hard work in this country. So why do politicians get the day off?
The people who pass labor policies don't stand in labor lines. They don't compete for openings that no longer exist. And they don't feel the lag when an entire workforce pipeline gets cut. They just call it a holiday. People are told unemployment rose because too many workers exist, but the data says the opposite. Federal Reserve regional data showed net immigration didn't just slow, it reversed. That means fewer working-age adults entering the economy at the exact moment retirement spiked. The labor force didn't rebalance, it thinned. Less immigration didn't raise wages fast enough to compensate. It reduced job creation first. That's the exact window where unemployment began climbing. Not before, not after, right there.
Nothing humbles you like going through 4 rounds of interviews for a job, then getting an email rejection where they say they went with a different candidate, and then logging on to LinkedIn and seeing that they reposted the job 20 minutes ago.
Companies aren't choosing candidates. They're stalling decisions in a labor market that lost momentum. When growth slows, hiring turns into theater.
Just got another email talking about, we moved on to another candidate. Well, I'm finna move on to OF or a drug cartel. How do I submit my resume to someone in that area?
People joke because the alternative is admitting something darker. The system didn't break overnight. It was tightened, deliberately, and now it's snapping under pressure. Less immigration didn't fix unemployment. It helped push it higher.
Why don't I hire Americans? The simple answer is we can't get the workers. No American ever calls. No American ever shows up. That's why we are so grateful for the guys that are willing to come and do the work here on the farm. We can't do this without them. And we can't do this with people in our local communities a lot of the time.
Americans didn't suddenly stop wanting to work. They were priced out, pushed out, or trained away from these jobs decades ago. When wages didn't keep up. When housing moved farther from farms. When stability disappeared, people didn't quit working. They adapted. This isn't Americans refusing work. It's Americans being structurally removed from it. This is where the story gets twisted on purpose. Immigrant labor didn't replace American workers. It replaced a labor system that stopped working for Americans. And when immigration slowed, the jobs didn't magically come back. They just stopped getting filled and stopped getting created.
Do immigrants drain the public finances? It used to be that opponents of economic migration would complain that immigrants competed for jobs with locals and undercut their wages.
That argument assumes jobs are a fixed pie, but the labor market doesn't work like musical chairs. When more workers enter, businesses expand, demand rises, and more jobs get created, not fewer. So if immigrants were really stealing jobs, unemployment should fall when immigration drops. But that's not what happened.
But over the past decade, with unemployment mostly low, this argument has lost much of its power. Instead, a new argument has emerged. It is that economic migrants, even those migrants who come to work, end up taking more from governments in welfare than they pay to governments in taxes. It's a more powerful argument. But is it true?
Here's the problem with that shift. It focuses on costs and ignores output. Because when immigration slowed, entire sectors didn't suddenly free up jobs for locals. They stalled. According to research from the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, every major sector of the U.S. economy saw employment growth decline at the same time. Even sectors that rely less on immigrant labor still lost momentum. So the slowdown wasn't about who was working. It was about how much work was getting done, and how much growth vanished when labor supply shrank. Lower immigration didn't tighten the labor market the way people expected. It thinned it out. Fewer workers meant fewer shifts, fewer expansions, fewer new postings, even before layoffs show up in the data.
Yay! Approximately 30% of all jobs posted online are completely fake. And when someone submits their resume, they only have about a 0.4% chance of getting the job. Let's get these f***ing numbers up.
This is what a slowing labor market looks like on the ground. Not mass layoffs, but phantom jobs. Postings that exist to collect resumes, satisfy investors, or give the illusion of growth. When real hiring dries up, competition explodes, and unemployment rises quietly.
67% of Americans now say they live paycheck to paycheck, aka 67% of employers don't pay their employees a livable wage.
This is the downstream effect. When job growth slows, wages stall, hours get cut, And even people who are employed feel unemployed financially. So when immigration was reduced, unemployment didn't fall. It crept up. Not because immigrants were gone, but because growth left with them.
Foreign-born workers have always played a substantial role in the American economy. In 2019, there were 28.4 million migrant workers in the U.S. labor force, accounting for over 17% of the total labor force.
This isn't a side note in the economy. It's a foundation. When nearly 1 in 5 workers is foreign-born, changes to immigration policy don't stay isolated. They ripple through entire state economies, especially fast-growing ones.
On June 22nd, President Trump signed an executive order suspending the entry of certain types of temporary foreign workers into the U.S.
That order didn't just stop people at the border. It quietly reduced the flow of labor into industries that were already stretched thin: construction sites, farms, logistics hubs, places where replacing workers isn't instant or easy.
Friday marks the first so-called clean jobs report since the government shutdown. It could have big implications as well for what the Fed may do at its next meeting later this month. Joining us now, Mohamed El-Erian. He's Allianz's chief economic advisor. So this is going to be data that we can trust, yeah?
This will be more normal data, cleaner data, as you called it. And what's interesting is the consensus forecast isn't looking for anything dramatic. Pretty constant job growth at about 55,000, pretty constant unemployment rate about 4.5%, and pretty constant labor force participation.
At first glance, the numbers look calm. No shock, no collapse. But surface-level stability can hide a deeper shift, especially when job growth slows, not because companies don't want workers, but because workers aren't showing up.
So the meat of this report is going to be the details that will tell us the extent of cooling of the labor market, and most importantly, is it demand-driven or is it supply-driven?
That's the real question. Are businesses pulling back, or is the labor supply quietly shrinking? In some states, the answer is becoming clearer. Texas has been one of the strongest job growth states in the country, largely because people kept moving there. Domestic migrants, international migrants, workers. Over the past 3 years, international migration into Texas surged, and employment surged with it. But when those inflows slowed, job growth slowed too, falling below its long-term trend. Surveys from the Dallas Fed show why. 1 in 5 Texas businesses says immigration policy is now hurting their ability to hire and retain workers. Some are already feeling the damage. And the problem is likely bigger than the data shows, because entire immigrant-heavy industries like construction and agriculture aren't even fully counted. This isn't just a Texas story. It's a preview of what happens nationally when labor inflows slow.
So how does banning work visas impact the U.S. economy?
When fewer workers arrive, jobs don't automatically go to locals. Instead, projects stall, hiring freezes spread, and growth cools. And that's how unemployment can rise, even when businesses are still looking for workers. The Texas case shows the paradox clearly. Slowing immigration doesn't tighten the labor market, it weakens it. And when job growth weakens enough, unemployment follows.
We have some breaking news we're following. This is out of Washington, as just in the last hour, termination notices were expected to begin hitting inboxes of thousands of State Department employees as part of the Trump administration's efforts to drastically shrink the federal government. We're going to bring back NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba on this. Monica, what do we know? What do we not know about these terminations?
Well, Alex, we know that the termination notices were supposed to go out starting around 10 a.m. and that likely they would roll out for a couple of hours due to how slow the internal State Department email system is. So this is a situation where many State Department employees yesterday were put on alert. We're told that today they could be getting that kind of information. So to be prepared for that and to come to work with everything, they might need to return before leaving the State Department for the last time today. And we're talking about civil servants in addition to foreign service officers, as many as 3,000 cuts expected today. And it's not just all layoffs necessarily. Some people were offered the opportunity to take early retirement, for instance.
This is where the story gets uncomfortable. When people talk about unemployment rising, the assumption is usually competition. But what we're actually seeing here is contraction. These layoffs aren't immigrants replacing workers. They're entire job pipelines being shut down. When government employment pulls back at scale, the ripple effects hit contractors, local services, and private sector hiring all at once.
Over in America, things are similar. Using the best assumptions available, the 75-year fiscal impact of a migrant with a postgraduate degree is a contribution of over $400,000 at 2012 prices. The same calculation for an immigrant with less than a high school education is a fiscal deficit of $115,000. This is because governments redistribute money to low-skilled migrants through in-work benefits, progressive tax systems, and social housing. Additionally, when migrants bring dependents into a country, they too can be a fiscal burden, as can the migrant in old age if they stay permanently and claim pensions and healthcare themselves.
This argument shows up a lot in policy debates, the idea that immigrants must be sorted into good and bad based on education level or short-term fiscal math. But this framing misses how labor markets actually function. Workers don't just consume public services, they sustain entire economic ecosystems.
But it's not as simple as that. Migrants also increase the taxes paid by the companies they work for and the people who fund those companies. And by one estimate, including that effect, flips the fiscal impact of even a low-skilled migrant to strongly positive. There's also the fact that migrants increase the diversity of the labour force, which makes all workers more specialised, raising their productivity, their incomes, and therefore the taxes they pay, and that creates a further fiscal boost too. It's safe to say that high-skilled migrants are far better for the public finances than low-skilled ones, and should therefore be prioritised. But that's not the same thing as saying that the low-skilled migrants who have already arrived are a net fiscal burden. Ultimately, nationalists have more evidence than when they used to talk about jobs and wages. But their arguments are still weaker than they think.
And here's the part that rarely makes headlines. When immigrant labor disappears, companies don't magically hire faster. They delay expansion, cut hours, automate, or relocate. Productivity drops. Wages don't rise, they stagnate. And unemployment doesn't fall, it spreads. So when immigration is reduced, the question isn't who gets the jobs, it's whether the jobs still exist at all. The data confirms the pattern. Since early 2025, the US labor force lost hundreds of thousands of foreign-born workers, not gradually, but abruptly. That gap wasn't filled. It became a shock. Economic growth depends on two things: productivity and people. When one collapses, unemployment rises even for citizens. Immigrants didn't just fill jobs, they powered growth. They supported an aging workforce. And for a decade, they accounted for more than half of all labor force expansion. Removing them didn't protect workers, it weakened the entire system.
It should be criminal how low the pay has gotten due to mass layoffs. The fact that legacy big media companies are offering $50K for jobs that would have paid that much 10 years ago. In New York, almost every job I'm getting an interview for is $17 an hour. It's like project manager roles. This is insane. It should be criminal.
This is the lived result. Fewer workers doesn't mean higher pay when demand collapses alongside supply. What it creates is desperation, lower wages, fewer openings, and workers competing in a shrinking market. Unemployment rises not because there are too many people, but because there are too few opportunities left.
A well-known and respected tech CEO, Dario Amodei, who heads a cutting-edge AI company called Anthropic, is raising alarms tonight about AI's potential impact on employment that could soon be felt.
This isn't a fringe warning, it's coming from the people building the system itself. When someone at the center of technological change starts talking about unemployment, economists pay attention, because this isn't about theory anymore, it's about labor supply shocks.
While he says AI can lead to incredible advancements like medical breakthroughs and boost the economy, he believes it could also lead to half of entry-level white-collar jobs disappearing and 10 to 20% unemployment in the next 1 to 5 years.
Productivity rises, but employment doesn't automatically follow. When technology adds workers faster than the economy can absorb them, job finding slows. And when job finding slows, unemployment rises, even if the economy is growing. This isn't new. It's a mechanism economists have observed for decades. There's substantial empirical evidence for this dynamic. Across countries, across decades, researchers observe the same effect. When large numbers of new workers enter a labor market quickly, unemployment among existing workers rises at least in the short run. During the Great Depression, internal migration inside the United States produced a stark result. For every 100 new workers arriving in a city, 21 residents lost their jobs, and nearly the same number left the city entirely. Entire states tried to block labor inflows, not out of ideology, but desperation, and this wasn't unique to America. After the Algerian War of Independence, France absorbed hundreds of thousands of returning citizens and refugees. Researchers found that every 100 new arrivals translated into 20 to 27 local workers becoming unemployed. Different countries, different eras, same mechanism.
Dario, you've said that AI could wipe out half of all entry-level white-collar jobs and spike unemployment to 10 to 20%. How soon might that happen?
You know, I've been building AI for over a decade, and I think maybe the most salient feature of the technology and what is driving all of this is how fast the technology is getting better. A couple of years ago, you could say that AI models were maybe as good as a smart high school student. I would say that now they're as good as a smart college student and sort of reaching past that.
Speed is the key word. Just like mass migration or population surges, AI doesn't need to replace everyone to raise unemployment. It only needs to change the labor supply faster than the economy can rebalance. And history shows us what happens when that balance breaks.
Hi, my name is Svenja Goodell, and I'm Chief Economist at Indeed. The hiring market for the last, 2-3 years has been continuously cooling, a little bit on shaky legs. Employers really have to start thinking about what skills they need to hire for the future. And it's really all about what type of technology you're infusing, right? And how you're setting and mixing that with your own tools and processes on the job.
What often gets missed in conversations about a cooling hiring market is why it feels shaky in the first place. When immigration enforcement intensifies, entire segments of the workforce don't just change jobs, they disappear. Employers aren't only rethinking skills or technology. Many are quietly struggling to replace workers who are no longer there at all.
One of the things I think a lot about is, of course, AI. And what we're going through right now is going to make us all feel a little uncomfortable. And that's very normal. The cool thing about AI is that it's the disruptor, but it's also the technology that can hopefully help you adapt to all of this change, right? So if we can harness that power correctly and actually use the disruptor to our advantage, I think that's a really nice silver lining of all of this disruption.
Technology is often framed as the big disruptor, but immigration enforcement is a disruptor too, just a far more abrupt one. Deportations sharply reduce the supply of labor almost overnight. Businesses lose workers who are already trained, already productive, and already contributing to revenue that pays for rent, equipment, and wages for everyone else.
And you'll use certain parts AI and certain parts human to be able to produce output. That's really where we're seeing a bulk of the transformation or the bulk of the impact sit in that hybrid space. So the mix of skills that employers will hire for the job of tomorrow are going to change quite a bit.
But when immigration is reduced, the problem isn't just which skills are needed, it's that fewer people are available to do the work at all. Immigrants tend to have high employment rates, so arrests, detentions, and deportations directly remove workers from the labor force. Others leave voluntarily to stay with deported family members, shrinking the workforce even further. Research on programs like Secure Communities shows this chilling effect spreads beyond immigrants themselves. Even U.S. citizens in mixed-status households pulled back from public programs and economic participation, worried about exposing family or community members to risk. When fear enters the labor market, productivity exits. When labor supply collapses fast enough, some employers don't adapt. They shut down. Studies show that increased deportations reduce the number of childcare centers, restaurants, and construction projects, cutting jobs for both immigrant and U.S.-born workers. Jobs in the U.S. economy are deeply connected. When immigrant roofers disappear, electricians lose work. When cooks vanish, restaurants cut hours. When caregivers leave, parents work less. Deportations don't just remove workers. They weaken bargaining power, lower wages, worsen conditions, and reduce consumer spending. Immigrants are not only workers, they're customers and business owners. Fewer immigrants means fewer businesses, fewer purchases, and fewer jobs overall. So why did unemployment rise at the same time immigration was reduced? Because the modern U.S. economy is deeply interconnected. When fewer people enter the workforce, businesses don't just struggle to fill jobs, they slow down, expand less, and hire less overall. That slowdown ripples outward, affecting immigrants and U.S.-born workers alike. Fewer workers can mean fewer customers, fewer new businesses, and fewer opportunities. But here's the hopeful part. History shows that labor markets are resilient. When policy adjusts, markets adapt, innovation returns, new industries form, productivity rises, and when smart, balanced workforce policies are put in place, job growth tends to follow. This isn't a story about blame. It's a story about understanding cause and effect, so better decisions can be made going forward. The data makes one thing clear. When people are allowed to work, contribute, and build, the entire economy benefits. The path forward isn't fear or division, it's informed policy, long-term thinking, and recognizing that economic growth isn't a fixed pie. It grows when more people are able to participate. If this breakdown helped you see the issue differently, hit the like button. It tells the algorithm this kind of content matters. Subscribe for more data-driven stories that cut through headlines and explain what's really happening in the economy. And most importantly, share this video with someone who thinks unemployment is a simple problem, because the truth is more complex, and understanding it is the first step toward making things better.